locked in the same space and how we can't be fighting all the time. And like I said in an earlier episode, this was my hill to die on. I stood up. I said, look. She struck me across the face. I did nothing. She went into the room, got my stuff, lit it on fire. I did nothing. Apparently, I've got a handle on the situation, and I know how to deal with these things. Okay? Why don't you have this conversation with her? Okay? And talk to her about how it's not okay to do this, because you came here ready to beat my ass if I had laid a hand on her. And they were quiet. And I went back downstairs to a hero's welcome from my roommate and my other friend, and continued to enjoy my night. Inevitably, I ended up getting back with her, and I never filed a report or anything. She apologized, and that was the end of it. And then several months later, we split up for good. She moved out. She left a box full of her, or not a box, why did I say that? She left a lot of her stuff here. And I texted her, asked her, hey, what do you want me to do with this stuff? And she texts back, oh, I don't care what you do. Okay. So I asked her, well, do you want me to burn it? Now, that was probably the wrong thing to say, but I'm a smartass, and my mouth can kind of get me in trouble sometimes. But just know that in this instance, that was not a threat. That was kind of a jab at her. And I didn't get a reply. So I gathered the stuff up, put it in a box, and took it to her aunt's house. And as far as I was concerned, it was the last time I was going to see her. It wasn't a great breakup. 2 days later, a cop shows up at my door and says, this is a protective order, a restraining order. And I said, what for? And he goes, well, she said you threatened to burn her belongings. Now, at this moment, I knew how the truth would come off, and it was very cringeworthy to me to try to sit there and explain to him what had happened, but obviously it didn't matter, because the thing had already been filed, and, there's nothing anyone can do about it. But I said, her stuff is at her house. Why am I receiving this? I mean, I have no intention of talking to her. And he goes, well, she just wanted to, something about safety. It's for her protection. And I thought, are you kidding me? After I had handled everything like Gandhi, one smart-ass comment gets me, in some, not hot water, but it's enough to label me as a potentially violent person. So, I had a court date on whether or not to uphold the restraining order, which really has very little consequence because, obviously we're not going to talk to each other, but, I was going to be damned if I went in there and was portrayed as someone who was violent, or if, that was going to be said about me. So I filed a report, and said what had happened, said who was involved, and I show up to court, and I had, my report with me, and I had things I wanted to say, and I wanted to set the truth straight, and I didn't even get a chance. The judge basically ripped me to shreds and said, this is very serious threat. The fact that you would consider doing this, and out of context, it looks like a threat. And there's nothing I could do. I tried to say my side, and she said, oh, it's irrelevant because this is going to be upheld anyway. And I just felt like I had been kicked in the nuts. And, because I don't fit, what the large majority of these cases actually are what the judge thought this case was. And it's a case of the male being violent and the female being a victim of that. And since I had waited to fill out a report and hadn't done anything and hadn't, gotten her in trouble, which is something I understand now, why people don't do that in those situations, because you still care about the person. But because I hadn't done that, I had to sit there and take it on the chin and be labeled as this, violent person. But that's a personal situation where the reality of it was very different from what you'd expect, what the norm would be. And because of that expectation, I was kind of vilified, and, my side wasn't exactly heard. And I feel like as soon as you start, and there are going to be cases like that where it's just, it happens to be different. And as soon as you start taking an idea of sexual assault, domestic violence, hell, even racism, and saying, well, these people aren't allowed to talk about it, or these people, their opinion on it is not valid, because the reality is there are people who that applies to. And as soon as you invalidate those people, guess what? Now some people feel like they can't speak up. And they feel alienated. People that this has actually happened to. And I know the argument for this most recent thing has been, well, some people were being dishonest about it, but people are going to be dishonest either way. Some people will say this stuff just to get attention. Best case scenario, when you tell someone who's unlikely to be a victim that they can't be involved, is that you're right about them not having that happen to them. Worst case scenario, you shut them out in the cold and they're not able to relate based on those experiences, which, I've kind of had that situation happen to me, being in the demographics I'm in. I get told all the time, well, what do you really know about gender discrimination or racial discrimination or, being abused? And to be honest with you, even though I don't like talking about that stuff, I have been in more situations where I've been a victim than I've been a perpetrator. And in a lot of those situations, because I'm not fitting of the norm of how those situations go, I just stay silent about it. That, and I got too much pride to actually paint myself as a victim. But there was another point I wanted to get into, and it's that when you have something happen to you that is truly unfair, when you've been wronged, when something's unjust, there is no... Let me rephrase this. You don't gain any privilege from having been in that situation. That's why it's unjust. Okay? You don't then get to go tell people that they're invalid because you don't think they're a part of that struggle, or you don't think that they've had those experiences, because now you've become a bigot. And, there's this saying, break the cycle. Well, when you go from a victim to being a bigot who tells people that their struggle is invalid because of things that they can't control, because they don't fit inside the norm of those experiences, like, you're just perpetuating a cycle, and you're making them feel alienated. So I want you to think about that, especially when you're on social media and you go to talk about things that you might not necessarily be a victim of, or you might be talking with people that don't seem like they're a victim of something. Don't invalidate them, okay? Because that doesn't help anyone. When things like this come up and people break this silence, it's to let them know that, you know what, they're not alone. So isn't alienating them kind of counterproductive? I don't know. But I also wanted to talk about I did want to talk about mistakes and faults, and people quick to jump on other people's mistakes and their faults, and the labeling theory. And as soon as someone makes a mistake, and people are out for blood. But I could talk about that for a very long time, and so I think I'll save that for its own episode. So for now, I'll just go ahead and end this with a song. This is "Curse Me Good" by The Heavy.